"You're not worth your Social Security check." My son Brian screamed that at me, right there on my front porch when I asked him to stop using my credit card for his gambling debts. I just stood there, clutching my morning coffee mug, the one with the faded "World's Best Mom" that he gave me years ago. I stayed silent, but something inside me cracked. You know that feeling when someone you raised, fed, and sacrificed everything for looks at you like you're nothing? That's exactly what I felt at 7:15 a.m. that Tuesday morning. For 2 years, I had been living on $1,200 a month from Social Security, skipping meals so Brian could get back on his feet. Every dollar I saved came from buying generic groceries and wearing the same 3 dresses I'd owned for a decade. 3 days later, I opened my credit card statement and saw $38,500 in charges I never made. My hands trembled as I dialed the bank. But when the representative told me what those charges were for, my blood ran cold. What I discovered about my own son's secret life made me realize I didn't know him at all, and that was just the beginning. My name is Margaret, and I'm 73 years old. I never thought I'd be telling this story, but here I am, sitting in my quiet kitchen, finally ready to share what my own son put me through. You know, they say blood is thicker than water, but sometimes that blood can poison everything it touches. It all started 6 years ago when my husband Robert passed away from a sudden heart attack. One minute he was laughing at something on the evening news, the next minute he was gone. Just like that. After 45 years of marriage, I found myself completely alone in this big house that suddenly felt like a museum of memories. Robert had been a good man, a hard worker. He spent 38 years as a supervisor at the local textile plant, never missed a day unless one of us was sick. We raised 2 boys, Brian and Daniel, and we thought we did everything right. We taught them respect, the value of honest work, and the importance of family. Or at least, that's what I thought. After the funeral expenses and getting Robert's affairs in order, I was left with a modest but decent income. My Social Security check was $1,680 monthly, and Robert's pension gave me another $2,120. It wasn't luxury, but it was enough for a woman living alone. I could pay my mortgage, keep the lights on, buy groceries, and even save a little each month. I felt grateful, actually. Many widows my age struggle much more. Daniel, my younger son, lives about 3 hours away with his wife Rachel and their daughter. He's an electrician, works hard for his family, and calls me every Sunday without fail. He visits for holidays and birthdays, brings flowers, helps fix things around the house when he can. That's the son I thought I raised. Then there's Brian. Brian is 37 now, and he's always been different. Even as a child, he had this way of making everything about himself. When Daniel got good grades, Brian would suddenly get sick and need attention. When we celebrated Daniel's high school graduation, Brian managed to start a fight with his girlfriend right there at the restaurant, making the whole evening about his drama. But he was still my son, you know? When he called me 3 months after Robert's funeral, crying about how he'd lost his job and was about to be evicted, my mother's heart just broke. Jessica, his wife, was pregnant with their second child, and little Tommy was only 2 years old. How could I say no? "Mom, we just need a place to stay for a few months," he said, his voice shaking with what I thought was genuine desperation. "Just until I get back on my feet. Jessica's having complications with the pregnancy, and we can't afford to lose our insurance right now." I remember standing in my empty living room, looking at Robert's favorite chair that no one would ever sit in again, and thinking that maybe having family around would help heal the loneliness. Maybe this was God's way of bringing us together during a difficult time. That was my first mistake. When they moved in, they brought chaos with them. Suddenly, my quiet, organized home was filled with screaming children, dirty dishes everywhere, and the constant noise of the television blaring day and night. But I told myself this was temporary. Family helps family, right? The few months turned into 6 months, then a year, then 2 years. Every time I gently asked about their plans to move out, Brian would get defensive. "Mom, you don't understand the job market these days," he'd say, shaking his head like I was some naive old woman. "It's not like when Dad got hired at the plant and stayed there forever. Things are different now. You can't just walk into a place and get a job." Jessica would chime in with her sweet voice and that fake smile. "We're so grateful, Margaret. We're trying our best, really. It's just hard with the kids and everything." I wanted to believe them. I needed to believe them. The bills started adding up quickly. My electricity bill went from $78 a month to $145. 4 people and all their devices. Plus, Jessica liked to keep the house at exactly 72 degrees year-round. The water bill jumped from $32 to $68. Longer showers, more laundry, dishes constantly running. But the grocery bill was what really shocked me. I'd been spending maybe $220 a month feeding myself, buying store brands, and cooking simple meals. With Brian's family, that number shot up to $980. They wanted name-brand everything. Jessica insisted on organic milk for the kids, which cost twice as much. Brian would come home with bags from the expensive deli section, saying the kids deserved good food. When I suggested maybe we could stick to a budget and buy some generic brands, Jessica got this hurt look on her face. "Oh, Margaret, I didn't realize money was so tight for you. I mean, with your Social Security and Robert's pension, I just assumed. But of course, if you can't afford to feed the children properly, we understand." The way she said it made me feel like I was being selfish for worrying about money. These were my grandchildren, after all. What kind of grandmother complains about feeding her own family? Then came the health insurance situation. Jessica's job at the department store only offered basic coverage, and adding the whole family would cost $420 a month. Brian wasn't working, so he had no benefits. They needed me to help cover the kids' insurance. "Mom, you know how expensive it is when kids get sick," Brian explained, sitting across from me at my own kitchen table like he was doing me a favor by having this conversation. "Tommy had that ear infection last month. Without insurance, that would have been $380 just for the doctor visit. And what if something serious happens? We can't take that risk." So I paid the insurance, another $420 out of my monthly budget. I was starting to feel the pinch, but I told myself this was what family did. Robert and I had always helped our boys when they needed it. This was just a rough patch, and things would get better. But things didn't get better. They got worse. About a year into their stay, Brian started asking for small loans for various emergencies. The car needed new tires, $280. Jessica needed work clothes for a new position, $150. Tommy needed special shoes for his flat feet, $95. At first, these requests came with promises of repayment and genuine-sounding gratitude. Brian would hug me and say things like, "Mom, you're saving our lives. I promise I'll pay you back as soon as I get on my feet." But the requests became more frequent, and the amounts got bigger. The water heater in their old apartment needed to be fixed before they could get their security deposit back, $380. Jessica's car broke down and needed a new transmission, $1,800. Brian had a job interview in the next town over and needed a new suit, $240. I started dipping into the small savings account Robert and I had built up over the years. We'd been so careful with money, putting away $50 or $100 whenever we could manage it. It wasn't much, about $8,400 total, but it was our safety net, our rainy day fund. One rainy day turned into a thunderstorm, and before I knew it, that account was down to $1,200. The worst part wasn't the money, though. It was the way Brian and Jessica started treating me in my own home. I've always been an early riser. Robert and I used to sit together in the kitchen at 6 a.m., drinking coffee and watching the sunrise through the window above the sink. After he died, I kept that routine because it helped me feel close to him. But Brian and Jessica stayed up late watching television, and they didn't appreciate being woken up by the sound of me moving around in my own kitchen. Jessica started leaving little notes for me. "Please try to be quieter in the mornings. The kids need their sleep." As if I was some kind of inconsiderate houseguest in the home I'd lived in for 32 years. When I tried to talk to Brian about it, he got irritated. "Mom, we're all trying to live together here. Can't you just make your coffee a little later? It's not like you have anywhere to be." The casual cruelty of that comment took my breath away. Not like I had anywhere to be. As if my life had no value, no purpose, no importance beyond serving their needs. But I adjusted my schedule anyway. I started getting up at 7 a.m. instead of 6. Then Jessica complained that was still too early, so I started waiting until 8. By that time, she and Brian were getting up anyway, and my quiet morning ritual, the one thing I had left of my life with Robert, was gone. The disrespect got worse over time. They rearranged my furniture without asking. Jessica redecorated the guest bathroom with her own towels and decorations, boxing up the things Robert and I had chosen together and sticking them in the garage. When I mentioned it, she acted like I was being unreasonable. I just thought it would be nice to freshen things up a bit. You've had the same decorations for so long. Don't you want the house to feel more lively? Brian started treating me like I was his employee rather than his mother. He'd leave dirty dishes in the sink and expect me to clean them. He'd use the last of the coffee or milk and never replace it. When I asked him to help with household chores, he'd say he was too stressed about job hunting to think about dishes. Job hunting. That became his excuse for everything. Sorry, I can't help with dinner, Mom. I've got 3 applications to fill out tonight. I can't watch the kids right now. I'm waiting for an important call from a potential employer. Could you pick up my dry cleaning? I would do it, but I have a phone interview this afternoon. I wanted to be supportive. I really did. I knew the job market was tough, especially for someone Brian's age who'd been laid off from his previous position. But months went by, and I never saw any evidence of this intensive job search he kept talking about. No resumes printed out on my computer, no interview clothes laid out, no reference calls coming to the house. When I asked how the job hunting was going, he'd give vague answers about leads and possibilities and waiting to hear back. Meanwhile, Jessica's hours at the department store got cut from full-time to part-time, reducing her income from $2,100 a month to about $1,400. This, of course, meant they needed even more help from me. It's just temporary, Brian assured me when they asked me to cover more of the groceries. As soon as I land something good, we'll pay you back everything. By this point, I was spending about $2,200 of my $3,800 monthly income just on expenses related to having them live with me. I was down to $1,600 for my own needs, my own food, my medications, my car payment, my personal expenses. I started cutting corners wherever I could. I switched to the cheapest grocery store in town and bought only generic brands for myself while continuing to buy name brands for them. I stopped getting my hair done at the salon and learned to cut it myself. I canceled my subscription to the local newspaper and started reading it online at the library. But even with all those sacrifices, money was getting tight. I was dipping into my savings more and more often, and that safety net was disappearing fast. The breaking point should have come when I found out they'd been taking my car without asking. I discovered this when I went to drive to my doctor's appointment and found my gas tank completely empty, even though I'd filled it up 3 days earlier. When I confronted Brian about it, he acted like I was making a big deal out of nothing. Mom, we just borrowed it to take the kids to the park. Jessica's car was making that noise again, and we didn't want to risk breaking down with Tommy and little Sarah in the car. You could have asked me, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. You were taking a nap, and we didn't want to wake you. Besides, it's not like you were using it. Again, that casual dismissal of my autonomy, my ownership, my rights in my own life. But I didn't say anything more. I just filled up the tank again and tried to put it out of my mind. I should have seen the pattern forming, the gradual erosion of my boundaries, my independence, my financial security, the way they'd trained me to accept less and less respect while giving more and more of myself. But I think part of me was afraid that if I stood up to them too firmly, they'd leave, and I'd be alone again in this empty house with nothing but memories of Robert and the growing certainty that I'd failed as a mother. The real wake-up call came on a Tuesday morning in March. I'd spent the weekend helping Jessica with spring cleaning, reorganizing closets and washing curtains and scrubbing baseboards until my arthritic hands were raw. I was tired, I was sore, and I was running on about 4 hours of sleep because little Sarah had been crying with an ear infection all night. I made my coffee at 8 a.m. as I'd been trained to do, and sat down at the kitchen table to look through the mail. Mixed in with the usual bills and advertisements was my credit card statement. I almost didn't open it. I'd been using the card more frequently lately to cover the shortfall between my income and our household expenses, but I thought I had a pretty good handle on the balance, maybe $2,800 or so. The number on the page made me think there'd been some kind of mistake. $8,347. I blinked and looked again. Still $8,347. My hands started shaking as I flipped through the pages of charges. Premium grocery store, $287. High-end children's clothing store, $456. Expensive restaurant downtown, $189. Electronics store, $1,244. Another restaurant, $134. Gas station, $67. Department store, $398. Page after page of charges I didn't remember making. Hundreds of dollars at places I'd never even heard of. My heart was hammering in my chest as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. Had someone stolen my card? Was this identity theft? Then I saw a charge that made my blood run cold. $2,400 at a casino dated last Friday night. Brian had told me he was going to a job fair that Friday. He'd even asked to borrow my car because Jessica needed hers for work the next morning. I'd given him $40 for gas and wished him luck. He'd gone gambling instead, with my credit card. I sat there in my kitchen, staring at that statement, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. This wasn't a mistake or an accident or a desperate moment of weakness. This was deliberate. This was calculated. This was theft. But even as the reality of it hit me, even as I felt sick to my stomach with betrayal and anger, part of me was still making excuses for him. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe he'd meant to tell me about it. Maybe he was planning to pay it back. I was still sitting there trying to process what I'd discovered when Brian wandered into the kitchen wearing nothing but boxer shorts and a ratty t-shirt. His hair was messy, his eyes were bloodshot, and he had that slightly hangover look that I'd been pretending not to notice more and more often lately. "Morning, Mom," he mumbled, heading straight for the coffee pot. "You're up early." "It's 8:30, I said quietly. He shrugged and poured himself a large mug, adding generous amounts of the expensive creamer Jessica had insisted we needed to buy. "Any coffee cake left?" I'd made a coffee cake from scratch the day before, using the last of my baking supplies. Brian and Jessica had eaten most of it while watching a movie the night before, leaving me one small slice that I'd been saving for this morning. "There's a little left," I said. He opened the refrigerator and took out the container, dumping the remaining piece onto a plate. My piece. The one I'd been looking forward to having with my coffee. That's when something inside me finally snapped. "Brian," I said, holding up the credit card statement with a trembling hand. "We need to talk about this." He glanced over at the paper, and his face went completely white. For a split second, I saw panic in his eyes, real, genuine fear. But then his expression shifted, and he got that defensive, angry look I'd seen so many times before. "Mom, I can explain. $8,000, Brian. $8,000 that I don't have. It's not what it looks like. There's a charge here for $2,400 at a casino, last Friday. When you told me you were going to a job fair." His jaw tightened, and I could see him calculating, trying to figure out what story would work best. That's complicated, Mom. I was going to tell you about it. You were going to tell me that you stole my credit card and went gambling?" "I didn't steal anything," he exploded, slamming his coffee mug down on the counter so hard that coffee splashed everywhere. "It's not stealing when you're family. You gave me that card for emergencies. Gambling is not an emergency, Brian. You don't understand the pressure I'm under." His voice was getting louder, and I could hear Jessica and the kids starting to stir upstairs. "Do you have any idea what it's like to be unemployed for 2 years? To feel like a failure every single day? To have people look at you like you're worthless? So you decided to make me feel worthless instead?" That stopped him cold. For just a moment his anger faltered, and I thought maybe I was finally getting through to him. Maybe he would apologize. Maybe he would acknowledge what he'd done to me. Maybe we could find a way to fix this. Instead, he looked me straight in the eye and said the words that would change everything between us forever. "You're not worth your Social Security check." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually staggered backward, clutching the edge of the kitchen table for support. "What did you say?" "You heard me," he said, his voice cold and cruel in a way I'd never heard before. "You think you're so generous, helping us out? But what else are you going to do with that money? Sit here alone in this house buying things you don't need? At least we're giving you a purpose." I just stood there, staring at this man who looked like my son, but was saying things I couldn't reconcile with the child I'd raised, the baby I'd nursed through fevers, the little boy I'd taught to ride a bike, the teenager I'd stayed up nights worrying about. "You think I owe you," he continued, warming up to his theme now, like this was something he'd been thinking about for a long time. "But you're the one who owes us. Who's going to take care of you when you get old and sick? Who's going to visit you in whatever nursing home you end up in? We're your retirement plan, Mom. The least you can do is help us get on our feet." I felt tears starting to burn my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Not in front of him. Not when he was looking at me like I was nothing more than an ATM with legs. "I want you to stop using my credit card," I said quietly. "Fine," he snapped. "But don't come crying to me when the bills keep coming and you can't afford them on your own. You need us here just as much as we need to be here." He stomped out of the kitchen, leaving me alone with that credit card statement and the growing realization that everything I thought I knew about my son was wrong. I sat there for a long time, reading through those charges again and again, trying to understand how I'd let things get this far, how I'd become so blind to what was happening in my own home. But even in that moment of clarity, even with the evidence right there in black and white, I wasn't ready to face the full truth of what Brian and Jessica had been doing to me. I thought the casino charge was the worst of it. I was so wrong. Have you ever been in a situation where someone you trusted completely turned out to be lying to you about everything? Where you realized that your kindness was being seen as weakness and your love was being used as a weapon against you? Tell me in the comments what you would do if you found yourself in my shoes, because what I discovered next made that credit card statement look like pocket change. That confrontation with Brian left me shaken to my core, but it also did something I hadn't expected. It woke me up. For the first time in almost 3 years, I started paying real attention to what was happening in my own house. The next few days were tense. Brian avoided me, staying in his room or leaving the house for hours at a time without explanation. Jessica tried to smooth things over with her usual fake sweetness, bringing me cups of tea and talking about how stressed Brian was about his job search. But I wasn't buying it anymore. I'd seen behind the mask, and I couldn't unsee it. I decided I needed help figuring out exactly how bad my financial situation had become. My neighbor Martha Henderson had been my friend for over 15 years, and her grandson Kevin was an accountant who'd helped her sort out some tax problems a few years back. I trusted Martha, and more importantly, I knew she wouldn't judge me for the mess I'd gotten myself into. On Thursday morning, after Brian and Jessica had left the house, him for another mysterious job interview and her for her part-time shift at the department store, I walked over to Martha's house with a manila envelope full of bank statements, credit card bills, and receipts. Martha took one look at my face and knew something was seriously wrong. "Margaret, honey, what's going on? You look like you haven't slept in days." I told her everything. The escalating expenses, the credit card charges I hadn't made, Brian's cruel words about my Social Security check. By the time I finished, Martha was shaking her head in disgust. "That boy needs a reality check," she said firmly. "And you need to know exactly how much damage he's done. Let me call Kevin." Kevin came over that same afternoon. He was a sweet young man in his early 30s, recently married, with the kind of patient demeanor you need when dealing with financial chaos. I spread all my paperwork across Martha's dining room table and watched his expression grow more and more concerned as he went through everything. "Mrs. Thompson," he said after about an hour of calculations, "I need you to sit down for this." The news was worse than I'd imagined. Much worse. Based on the credit card statements and bank records I'd brought, Kevin calculated that Brian and Jessica had cost me approximately $47,000 over the past 2.5 years. That included not just the obvious expenses like groceries and utilities, but also cash advances I didn't remember authorizing, online purchases that had been delivered to the house, and a whole series of smaller charges that had added up over time. But that wasn't the most shocking part. "Mrs. Thompson," Kevin said gently, Have you checked your credit report recently? I hadn't. I barely understood what a credit report was, to be honest. Robert had always handled the more complicated financial matters, and after he died, I just focused on paying the monthly bills and trying to stay afloat. Kevin pulled up my credit report on his laptop, and what he showed me made my stomach drop to the floor. There were 5 personal loans in my name that I had never applied for. 5 loans totaling $62,000, with monthly payments that would consume $1,847 of my monthly income for the next 14 years. I stared at the screen in complete disbelief. That's impossible. I never applied for any loans. Kevin's face was grim. Someone did, and they used your social security number, your address, and what looks like your signature on the applications. The room started spinning around me. I gripped the edge of Martha's dining room table and tried to breathe. Kevin, Martha said quietly, are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying this looks like identity theft. Someone has been using Mrs. Thompson's personal information to take out loans in her name. But even as he said the words, we all knew who that someone was. There was only one person who had access to all my personal information, who knew my social security number by heart, who could have forged my signature well enough to fool a loan officer. My own son. I felt sick, physically sick. I excused myself to Martha's bathroom and threw up everything I'd eaten that day. When I came back out, Kevin and Martha were talking in low, urgent voices. The first loan was taken out 18 months ago, Kevin was explaining. Right around the time Mrs. Thompson said Brian started asking for bigger emergency loans. It all started making horrible sense. Brian hadn't been gambling away my credit card money on a whim. This was systematic. This was planned. He'd been using my identity to fund what was apparently a serious gambling addiction. And when the credit cards maxed out, he'd moved on to personal loans. What do I do? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Kevin looked at me with such compassion that I almost started crying right there. First, we report this to the police. This is fraud, and it's a felony. Second, we contact all 3 credit bureaus and put a freeze on your credit. Third, we start the process of disputing these fraudulent accounts. But he's my son, I said, knowing how pathetic it sounded even as the words came out of my mouth. Mrs. Thompson, Kevin said gently, your son has stolen your financial future. If you don't take action now, you'll be paying for his crimes until you're 87 years old. Is that the life you want? I went home that evening feeling like I was walking through a nightmare. Everything in my house looked the same, but I saw it all differently now. The expensive toys scattered around the living room, bought with stolen money. The designer clothes hanging in Jessica's closet, purchased with fraudulent credit. The big screen television Brian had insisted we needed for the kids, paid for with loans taken out in my name. I was living in a house full of evidence of my own exploitation, but I still wasn't ready to confront them. Not yet. I needed more information first. I needed to understand the full scope of what they'd been doing. That night, after everyone went to bed, I did something I'd never done before in my life. I snooped. I started with Brian's room. He and Jessica had taken over what used to be my craft room, and it barely resembled the space I'd once used for sewing and reading. Their clothes were everywhere. Expensive electronics cluttered every surface, and the closet was packed with shopping bags from stores I couldn't afford to shop in. In Brian's bedside table, I found a stack of papers that made my heart stop. Betting slips, dozens of them, football games, basketball games, horse races. Some for amounts as small as $50, others for as much as $1,500. Most of them were losers. I also found his phone charger, and when I plugged it in, his phone lit up with notifications. I know I shouldn't have looked, but I couldn't stop myself. What I saw there changed everything. Text messages between Brian and someone named Marcus, apparently his bookie. Brian, need another week on the 3K. Things are tight right now. Marcus, you said that last week, man. My patience isn't infinite. Brian, I know, but I've got a sure thing coming up this weekend. Bears are going to cover easy. Marcus, you better hope so, and next time you're short, don't come crying to me. There were dozens of messages like this, going back months. Brian wasn't just gambling recreationally. He was in deep with people who didn't mess around when it came to collecting debts. But the text messages that really destroyed me were the ones between Brian and Jessica. Jessica, how much did you get from the old lady today? Brian, 800, told her it was for Tommy's doctor appointment. Jessica, perfect. That covers the Miami hotel. Did you book the flights yet? Brian, yeah, used her card. She'll never notice with all the other charges. Jessica, God, she's so clueless. Sometimes I almost feel bad for her. Brian, don't. She's getting exactly what she deserves. All those years of guilt trips about how much she sacrificed for us. Now she can actually sacrifice something. I sat there on my bedroom floor, reading message after message of them mocking me, celebrating each successful manipulation, planning trips and purchases with money stolen from my retirement. They called me the old lady. They laughed about how clueless I was. They talked about me like I was some kind of mark in a con game, not a mother and grandmother who loved them. The worst part was a conversation from just 2 weeks earlier. Jessica, she's starting to ask questions about money. Maybe we should back off for a while. Brian, no way. We're too close to paying off Marcus. Once that's done, we can ease up. Jessica, what if she figures it out? Brian, she won't. And even if she does, what's she going to do? Call the police on her own son? She needs us more than we need her. Jessica, you're right. Besides, it's not like she's going to live forever. Might as well enjoy the money while she's around to see us spend it. I don't remember getting from the bedroom floor to the bathroom, but that's where I found myself 20 minutes later, throwing up again while my whole body shook with rage and heartbreak. They were waiting for me to die so they could inherit whatever was left of my money. That realization cut deeper than anything else. This wasn't just about financial abuse or identity theft. This was about two people who had looked at an old woman's love for her family and decided to weaponize it against her. I couldn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my kitchen, making lists and plans. I was done being a victim. I was done being the old lady they could manipulate and mock. The next morning, I called Kevin and told him I was ready to take action. But I also told him I wanted to do this strategically. I wanted to gather every piece of evidence I could before I made my move. I want to hire a private investigator, I said. Kevin was surprised. Mrs. Thompson, we already have enough evidence for the police. I want to know everything, I interrupted. Every lie they've told me. Every dollar they've stolen. Every scheme they've been running. When I confront them, I want them to know that I know it all. Kevin gave me the name of a retired police detective who worked as a private investigator. Her name was Sarah Martinez, and she specialized in financial crimes and domestic investigations. I met with Sarah that Tuesday afternoon at a coffee shop across town, somewhere I was sure Brian and Jessica would never see me. Sarah was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, with gray-streaked hair and the kind of direct gaze that made you feel like she could see right through any lie you might try to tell. I told her everything, showed her the text messages I'd photographed, gave her copies of all the financial documents Kevin had helped me organize. This is a nasty case, Sarah said after reviewing everything. Financial elder abuse combined with identity theft. The good news is your son and daughter-in-law aren't nearly as smart as they think they are. They've left a trail a mile wide. How long will it take to get the full picture? I asked. Give me 2 weeks. I'll trace every fraudulent loan, document every lie, and get you a complete timeline of their criminal activity. But Mrs. Thompson, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. What? Are you prepared for this to destroy your relationship with your son permanently? Because once we expose everything they've done, there's no going back. No family dinners, no reconciliation, no pretending this never happened. Are you ready for that? I thought about Brian's face when he told me I wasn't worth my Social Security check. I thought about Jessica laughing with her friends about taking trips with money stolen from the old lady. I thought about them sitting in my kitchen, eating food I couldn't afford, planning my financial ruin while I worried about being too loud in my own house. Yes, I said firmly. I'm ready. Sarah smiled for the first time since I'd met her. Good. Let's destroy these bastards. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah worked her magic. She traced the fraudulent loans back to their origins, documented Brian's employment history, and even managed to get bank records showing where the stolen money had actually gone. The truth was so much worse than I'd imagined. Brian had been working for 9 months as a security guard at the Westfield Mall, making $2,400 a month. He'd been lying about being unemployed the entire time, pocketing his paychecks while letting me pay for everything. The money from the fraudulent loans, all $62,000 of it, had gone into a joint checking account that Brian and Jessica shared. From there, Sarah tracked it to online gambling sites, $23,000, luxury purchases, $18,000, cash withdrawals with no clear destination, $11,000, and a series of expensive vacations they'd taken while telling me they couldn't afford to move out, $10,000. But the piece of evidence that would prove most devastating was something Sarah discovered by accident while tracking their spending patterns. She found social media posts that Jessica had forgotten to make private, photos from their trip to Miami Beach, the one they'd taken while I was eating pasta for dinner every night to save money, pictures of them at expensive restaurants, shopping at designer stores, staying in a resort that cost $400 a night. And the captions Jessica had written were like daggers. Living our best life. Sometimes you just have to treat yourself. Blessed, you're no regrets. Amazing dinner at Ocean Drive. When you work hard, you deserve to play hard. Worth it. Shopping therapy is the best therapy. Thanks to my amazing husband for always taking care of us. Spoiled, skunk grateful. They were flaunting their fraud on social media, celebrating the money they'd stolen from me while I sat at home wondering if I could afford my blood pressure medication. Sarah also found evidence that they'd been planning to take out even more loans in my name. She discovered loan applications that had been started but not submitted, all for amounts between $15,000 and $25,000. They were going to bleed you dry, Sarah told me when she presented her final report. If you hadn't caught them when you did, you would have been looking at over $25,000 in fraudulent debt. I sat in my car outside Sarah's office for 20 minutes after that meeting, just staring at the thick folder of evidence in my lap. Photos, bank records, employment documents, social media screenshots, recorded phone conversations with loan officers, everything I needed to prove that my son and daughter-in-law were criminals. My son was a criminal. That night, I made my decision. I was going to end this once and for all. But I wasn't going to just call the police and let them handle it. I was going to confront Brian and Jessica myself first. I wanted to look them in the eye when they realized their game was over. I wanted them to know that the clueless old lady they'd been mocking and stealing from had outsmarted them at their own game. But first, I had one more thing to do. I called my other son Daniel and asked him to come for a visit that weekend. I didn't tell him why, but I said it was important. "Of course, Mom. Is everything okay?" "It will be," I said. "It will be." As I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't felt in almost 3 years. Powerful. For the first time since Robert died, I was taking control of my own life. The confrontation was going to happen on Sunday. I would invite everyone for what I'd call a family meeting to discuss household expenses. Brian and Jessica would come expecting to manipulate me into paying for more of their schemes. Instead, they were going to get the shock of their lives. Have you ever had to face the reality that someone you loved was deliberately hurting you? That their kindness was fake and their promises were lies? I'm curious to know what you think I should say to Brian and Jessica when I show them all this evidence. What would you do if you discovered your own family had been stealing your future right out from under your nose? Tell me in the comments, because Sunday was going to be a day none of us would ever forget. Sunday morning came with a crisp October sky and the kind of clarity that only follows a storm. I woke up at 6 a.m., my old schedule, the one I'd abandoned to accommodate people who didn't deserve my consideration. I made my coffee in my own kitchen, sat at my own table, and watched the sunrise through my own window. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like myself again. Daniel and Rachel arrived around noon with their daughter Emma, who immediately brightened my day by running into my arms shouting, "Grandma!" This is what family was supposed to feel like. Genuine love, uncomplicated by schemes and manipulation. "Mom, you look different," Daniel said, studying my face. "Good different. More like yourself." I hugged him tightly. I am myself again, honey. And after today, I think our family is going to look very different too. Brian and Jessica wandered downstairs around 1 p.m., both looking slightly hungover. They'd been out late Saturday night, another work networking event, according to Brian, though I now knew it was probably another gambling session. "Oh, great, Daniel's here," Brian muttered under his breath, but loud enough for me to hear. He'd always resented his younger brother's success, his stable marriage, his genuine respect for our family values. "Good to see you too, Brian," Daniel replied evenly. He'd clearly noticed the tension in the house, but he was too polite to comment on it directly. I announced that I wanted to have a family meeting after lunch to discuss some household financial matters. Jessica and Brian exchanged a look that I pretended not to notice, probably assuming I was going to ask for help managing my bills or maybe even increase their allowances. They had no idea what was coming. I served lunch, a simple meal of sandwiches and soup, and made pleasant conversation about Emma's school and Rachel's new job. The normalcy of it felt surreal, knowing what I was about to unleash. After we finished eating, I asked everyone to stay seated around the dining room table. Emma went to play in the living room where she could still see us, but couldn't hear our conversation clearly. I wanted to talk to everyone together because some things have come to light recently that affect our whole family, I began, my voice steady, despite my racing heart. I placed a large manila envelope on the table, the same kind of envelope I'd dreamed about for weeks. "What's this about, Mom?" Daniel asked gently. Brian and Jessica were both staring at the envelope like it might explode. "Well," I said, opening the envelope and pulling out the first set of documents. "It's about Brian's employment status, for starters." I placed Brian's employment records on the table, 9 months of pay stubs from Westfield Mall security, totaling over $21,000 in income he'd hidden from me. The silence was deafening. Brian's face went white, then red, then white again. "Mom, I can explain." "Oh, you don't need to explain anything," I said calmly. "I understand perfectly. You've been working full-time as a security guard for 9 months while telling me you couldn't find a job, while I paid for your groceries, your children's insurance, your car repairs, your wife's clothes, while I cut my own expenses down to almost nothing because I believed you were struggling." Daniel was staring at his brother in shock. "Brian, what the hell?" "It's not what it looks like," Jessica jumped in, her voice shaking. "The job doesn't pay very much, and with the kids, $2,400 a month," I interrupted. "That's what it pays. I have all the documentation right here." I pulled out the next set of papers, Sarah's investigation report showing exactly where their money had gone. But that $2,400 a month wasn't enough, apparently, because you also needed to steal from me. I placed the fraudulent loan documents on the table, all 5 of them, with Brian's forged signature highlighted in yellow. $62,000 in loans taken out in my name, using my Social Security number, without my knowledge or consent. That's a felony, Brian. Multiple felonies, actually. Rachel gasped and grabbed Daniel's hand. Daniel was staring at the documents like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "Mom," Brian said, his voice cracking. "You don't understand. I was going to pay it all back. I just needed time." "Time for what? To lose more of my money gambling?" I pulled out the betting slips I'd found in his room, spreading them across the table like a deck of cards. $23,000. That's how much of my stolen money you lost betting on sports games. Money I'll be paying back until I'm 87 years old if I live that long. Jessica was crying now, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of panic, the tears of someone who'd been caught red-handed. "And then there are these," I said, pulling out my phone and showing them the screenshots of their text messages. I read some of them aloud, my voice getting stronger with each word. "How much did you get from the old lady today? She's so clueless. Sometimes I almost feel bad for her. She's getting exactly what she deserves." Brian's face crumpled. "Mom, we didn't mean—" "Oh, you meant every word," I said firmly. "You meant it when you called me clueless. You meant it when you celebrated stealing from me. You meant it when you said I was getting what I deserved." I turned to Jessica. "And you meant it when you said it's not like I'm going to live forever, so you might as well enjoy the money while I'm around to see you spend it." Daniel's voice was barely controlled rage. Jesus Christ, Brian. Mom, I had no idea. I never would have. I know you didn't, sweetheart. This isn't about you. I pulled out the final piece of evidence, the printed photos from Jessica's social media accounts, pictures of them in Miami, at expensive restaurants, shopping at designer stores, living their best life on money stolen from my retirement. This is where my money went. Not to your children's needs, not to emergency expenses, not to getting back on your feet. To luxury vacations while I ate pasta every night to save money. To shopping sprees while I cut my own hair to save $30. I spread the photos across the table like evidence in a courtroom. You posted these online, Jessica, bragging about your amazing life, thanking your wonderful husband for taking such good care of you. Did it occur to you that the money you were spending was stolen from a 73-year-old woman who was skipping meals to help you? Jessica was sobbing now, but I felt no sympathy for her, not after what I'd been through. And the best part, I continued, is that you weren't even close to being done. Sarah found loan applications you'd started but hadn't submitted yet. Another $40,000 you were planning to steal from me. Brian finally found his voice. Who the hell is Sarah? Sarah Martinez, the private investigator I hired to uncover the full extent of your crimes. I smiled at the look of shock on their faces. Did you really think the clueless old lady would just sit there and take it forever? Daniel was staring at his brother like he'd never seen him before. Brian, how could you do this to her, after everything she's done for you? You don't understand, Brian said desperately. I was in deep with some bad people. If I didn't pay them back, then you should have gotten a second job, I snapped, or sold your car, or moved into a cheaper apartment, or done any one of 100 things that didn't involve stealing from your mother. But we couldn't afford— You couldn't afford what? To live within your means? To take responsibility for your own choices? To treat me with basic human decency? I stood up from the table, feeling more powerful than I'd felt in years. Here's what's going to happen. First, you have 30 days to find somewhere else to live. I don't care where, but it's not going to be here. Mom, please. Second, I've already reported the fraudulent loans to the police, the Federal Trade Commission, and all 3 credit bureaus. Detective Williams from the Financial Crimes Unit will probably want to talk to you sometime this week. Brian's face went gray. You called the police. What did you expect me to do? This isn't a family disagreement, Brian. This is criminal fraud. You committed multiple felonies against your own mother. Third, I continued, I've changed my will. Daniel, you and Rachel are now my sole beneficiaries. Brian, you and Jessica will inherit exactly as much from me as you've shown me respect. Nothing. Jessica let out a wail of despair, but I wasn't finished. And fourth, I never want to see either of you again after you move out. You're not welcome at family gatherings. You're not welcome for holidays. You're not welcome in my home. You made your choice when you decided to see me as a source of income rather than as a human being. The room was silent, except for Jessica's crying and the sound of Emma playing in the next room, blissfully unaware that her family was being torn apart. Brian tried one last desperate manipulation. Mom, what about Tommy and Sarah? They're your grandchildren. You're really going to cut them out of your life? For just a moment, my resolve wavered. Those children were innocent in all this. But then I thought about the lessons Brian and Jessica were teaching them, that it was okay to steal from family, that elderly people deserved no respect, that love could be bought and sold. You should have thought about your children before you decided to steal from their grandmother, I said quietly. You're the one who chose to put them in this situation, not me. Daniel finally spoke up. Brian, you need to leave. Now. Pack your things and get out of Mom's house. You can't just throw us out, Jessica screamed. We have nowhere to go. You'll figure something out, I said calmly. You're very resourceful when you want to be. After all, you managed to steal $62,000 without me noticing for over a year. I'm sure you can manage to find an apartment. Brian tried one more time. Mom, I'm sorry. I know I messed up, but we're family. We can work this out. I looked at this man who shared my DNA but had none of my values, who had my eyes but not my heart, who had lived in my house for 3 years while plotting my financial destruction. No, Brian, We can't work this out. You know why? Because I finally understand what you said to me that morning in the kitchen. I finally understand what you really think of me. I picked up the papers from the table and slid them back into the envelope. You said I wasn't worth my Social Security check. You were wrong. I'm worth so much more than that. I'm worth honesty. I'm worth respect. I'm worth being treated like a human being instead of an ATM. And I'm definitely worth more than being stolen from by my own son. I headed toward the kitchen, then turned back one more time. Oh, and Brian? You were wrong about something else too. You said I needed you more than you needed me. Turns out, I don't need you at all. The next few hours were chaotic. Brian and Jessica threw things into suitcases and garbage bags, arguing with each other and trying to get Daniel to intercede on their behalf. Daniel refused, and I could see in his eyes that he was looking at his brother like a stranger. They tried to take things that didn't belong to them. The big screen TV they'd given me for Christmas, some kitchen appliances they'd bought with my credit card. I calmly informed them that anything purchased with stolen money belonged to me, and if they took it, I'd add theft to the charges I was already filing. By 6 p.m., they were gone. The house felt different immediately, lighter somehow, like an oppressive weight had been lifted. Daniel, Rachel, and Emma stayed for dinner, and we talked about everything that had happened. Mom, I'm so sorry, Daniel said for the 10th time. If I had known... You couldn't have known, honey. They were very good at what they did. But it's over now. What happens next? With the legal stuff, I mean. Sarah thinks I can get most of the fraudulent loans canceled, since I have proof they were taken out without my knowledge. The credit card debt will be harder to fight, but at least I know where I stand now. And financially? I smiled. I'll be fine. Better than fine, actually. Without them draining my accounts every month, I'll have more money than I've had in 3 years. I might even take a vacation. That made Rachel laugh. Where would you want to go? I don't know yet. Somewhere I've never been. Somewhere nobody can find me to ask for money. Over the next few weeks, my life transformed in ways I hadn't expected. The police investigation moved forward. Detective Williams was particularly interested in the fraudulent loan applications and told me it was one of the most clear-cut cases of financial elder abuse she'd ever seen. The legal process was complicated, but Sarah's thorough investigation made all the difference. 4 of the 5 fraudulent loans were successfully canceled, saving me over $50,000 in debt I'd never agreed to take on. The 5th loan was trickier because Brian had somehow managed to forge my signature convincingly enough to fool the loan officer. But even that one was eventually reduced to a fraction of the original amount. The credit card debt was largely my responsibility, since I had given Brian access to the card. But the casino charges and several other obvious instances of fraud were reversed. When all was said and done, instead of owing $70,000 in debt that would have consumed my retirement, I ended up owing less than $8,000, an amount I could manage with my regular income. But the financial recovery was nothing compared to the emotional transformation. I started sleeping through the night again. I stopped jumping every time the phone rang, worried it would be another bill collector or another emergency that required my immediate financial assistance. I began eating meals I actually enjoyed, shopping at stores I liked, buying things I wanted instead of things other people needed. I got my hair done at a real salon for the first time in 3 years. I bought myself new clothes that fit properly and made me feel good about myself. I even started taking a watercolor painting class at the community center. Most importantly, I rediscovered what it felt like to be respected in my own home. Daniel and Rachel visited more often, and our relationships deepened. Emma started staying overnight on weekends, and we developed the kind of grandmother-granddaughter bond I'd never been able to have with Tommy and Sarah because their parents had poisoned them against me. I heard through mutual friends that Brian and Jessica had rented a cramped apartment across town and that their relationship was falling apart under the financial stress. Jessica's hours at the department store had been cut even further, and Brian had been fired from his security job when his criminal charges became public. Apparently, they'd tried to reconcile with me through intermediaries, sending messages about how sorry they were and how they wanted to work things out for the sake of the family. I never responded to any of it. 6 months later, I was in my garden planting tomatoes when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but when I answered, I heard a small voice I knew well. "Grandma Margaret?" It was Tommy, Brian's oldest child. He was crying. "Hi, sweetheart," I said gently. "Grandma, why don't you love us anymore?" My heart broke a little, but I knew this conversation was inevitable. "Tommy, I love you very much. I love you and your sister more than you could ever know." "Then why won't you see us? Daddy says you're mad at us." I sat down on my garden bench, trying to find words that a 7-year-old could understand. "I'm not mad at you, honey. I'm mad at your daddy and mommy because they did something very wrong to me. They took money that didn't belong to them, and they lied to me for a long time. But we miss you. I miss you too, more than you know. Will you ever come back?" I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of choices that weren't mine to make. "Tommy, when you're older, when you can understand better, maybe we can talk again. But right now, your daddy and mommy need to learn that what they did was wrong. And sometimes when people hurt us really badly, we have to protect ourselves by staying away from them. Even if they're sorry, even then sometimes." He was quiet for a moment, then, "I love you, Grandma." "I love you too, sweetheart. Always remember that." After he hung up, I sat in my garden for a long time, thinking about the choices we make and the consequences they have for everyone around us. Was I being too harsh? Maybe. But I'd learned something important over the past year. Love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's enablement. It's permission for people to treat you badly because they know there will never be any real consequences. Brian and Jessica hadn't just stolen money from me. They'd stolen my peace of mind, my sense of safety in my own home, my ability to trust my own judgment. They'd mocked my love and weaponized my generosity against me. Some people might say I should forgive them because they're family, but I've learned that family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by respect, by love, by treating each other with basic human decency. Daniel is my family. Rachel and Emma are my family. My neighbor Martha, who helped me when I needed it most, is more family to me than Brian ever was. Today, almost a year after that terrible Sunday confrontation, I'm living the best life I've lived since Robert died. I have my dignity back. I have my financial security back. I have my self-respect back. I take watercolor classes on Tuesday mornings and play bridge with Martha and her friends on Thursday afternoons. I volunteer at the animal shelter on weekends, and I'm planning a trip to Ireland next spring, something I've wanted to do for 30 years but never thought I could afford. I'm not the same woman who stood in her kitchen a year ago, trembling while her sons screamed that she wasn't worth her Social Security check. That woman was a victim, confused and hurt, and willing to sacrifice everything for people who saw her as nothing more than a source of income. This woman, the woman I am now, knows her worth. And anyone who doesn't treat me with the respect I deserve doesn't get access to my life, my money, or my love. It's a lesson I wish I'd learned sooner, but I'm grateful I learned it at all. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is showing them that their actions have consequences. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's destructive behavior, even if that someone is your own child. And sometimes standing up for yourself means standing alone. But I've discovered that standing alone with dignity is infinitely better than being surrounded by people who don't value you. I'm worth more than my Social Security check. I'm worth more than what I can provide for other people. I'm worth respect, honesty, and genuine love. And for the first time in years, I'm getting exactly what I'm worth. If this story touched your heart, if you've lived through something similar or know someone who went through this kind of betrayal, leave your comment telling me where you're watching from and what you felt hearing my story. Share this video with someone who needs to know that it's never too late to reclaim your dignity and demand the respect you deserve. Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel for more real stories of people who found the strength to change their lives, and click now on the story appearing on your screen, because every story of pain can transform into a story of victory, and every person deserves to know their true worth.